October the 9th, 1993. Westville trustees meeting.
If y'all will look in the last page of the one set of maps,
Frank Schnell,
sort of a
curator of the Columbus
detailed
Museum.
map showing the individual
The Indian
mounds here
expert.
on the site. And if you'll sort of face north while you're looking at it, you'll be oriented properly as well. North is right in this direction here. What you're doing right now is you're standing in the North Plaza of what was once a very large capital town of the Indian Nation in this area. This site is probably the fourth largest in the whole state of Georgia. And it was a religious and a political center, and probably an economic center as well for trade. This was just almost the Atlanta of South Georgia at the time. The thing that most people think of when they think of this site are the mounds, and there are 8 mounds here scattered all around us. Unfortunately, it's going to be hard to see some of them, but others you'll be able to see a little bit better. For instance, there's a nice big one right over there in the midst of all of that vegetation. If you look right over here, you can see the northernmost mound. On your map it says Mound D, and that's it right there. It's not particularly high. It's only about 7 or 8 feet high on this side, but it's the size of a football field. It's one of the largest mounds in surface area in the whole state of Georgia. We did some excavations there. Those of you that have the written descriptions, I've got some little discussions of the excavations that we did on those mounds. On that one right there, for instance, we found the most unusual thing we found was a series of 7 big fire pits scattered all along the length of that mound. The length of it goes east-west. And we don't really know what those fires were for. They may have been served some particular ceremonial purpose or something like that. I've got my own private theory. We were down here at one particularly buggy time of the year, and I said, I know, it's a giant smudge pot that would just drift down across the site to take care of all across the bugs. One of the things that's interesting about this site, as for example, that's one of the largest in Georgia. Each one of these mounds is practically unique for some reason or another. It's very, very special. For instance, right over there is Mound E on your map. That's the earth lodge that we excavated in the late 1960s. An earth lodge is a ceremonial building that has had earth pile up over it, so that if you had visited here somewhere around 1250 AD and you looked there, it would have looked just like a hump of dirt. But really what had happened is they had built a building there, and they put earthen berms up against the outside walls, and then probably ran large rafters on up to the roof and sodded the top of it, so that you had a hollow mound, if you will. If you've ever been to the mounds over at Oct National Monument, you've seen the earth lodge there that the National Park Service has restored. Well, this would have been something very similar to that, except this one was square, another unique feature, rather than round like the one at Oct National Monument. Mound C over here is a good rectangular mound. That's one mound where we have not excavated on top of it, but dug a trench into the side of it. And one of the good things about that is it gave us one of our earliest samples from this site, because we found a portion of the Indian village under the mound, meaning it was there before they built the mound. So we knew that was very early. Probably dates to somewhere around 1000 AD. One thing I didn't mention, by the way, is we have some radiocarbon dates from here. The earth lodge over there, for instance, dates to, if my memory serves me correctly, about 1265 AD. Let's see. well, 1275 AD. I came pretty close. That's been about 26 to 27 years ago we did that. So that mound over there was built sometime after 1000 AD. Directly south of us here, you see a little rise. That's Mound F, one of the smaller platform mounds on the site. A lot of people wonder if there's a burial mound here. The answer is probably no. Burial mounds were built by an earlier culture than the people that lived here. Now, there probably is what's known as a mortuary mound on the site, and it would just be wild guessing to say which one because we haven't done enough testing yet. A mortuary mound is literally a mound that had a mortuary building built on top of it. Mound F was probably a house mound. That is, it had somebody home on top of it. Either one of the leaders of the Indian nation that was controlled from here, or at least one of the wealthier members of the community. Over here you see Mound B, and that's another unusual mound because it's built in 2 layers. You see on your map there how it shows 2 different levels to it. We still don't know why that was. It's possible that it was built that way, with a higher level with a building on top of it and a lower level with a building on there. On the other hand, they may have been in the process of enlarging the mound when the site was abandoned. We just need to do more excavation. Archaeology always asks more questions than gives you an answer. Then finally, down there toward the south end of the site, you see Mound A and Mound G. We'll go down there and look at those and talk about them in just a few minutes.
Frank, who were these people?
These were people of the Mississippi culture. We were talking about that a few minutes ago. The Mississippi culture found its roots in the Mississippi Valley, and that's where it gets its name. And it began over there somewhere around 750 or 800 AD, and it was the beginning of intensive agriculture among the Indians here in the southeast, and they had almost literally a population explosion, and they spread out very quickly from the Mississippi Valley, and finally arrived here at the Singamoy site somewhere around 1000 AD. Another interesting thing about the site is this is probably a frontier town in addition to being a religious, political, and economic center. As a matter of fact, you know, just a mile or so over this way is the watershed between the Chattahoochee and the Flint rivers. There are no Mississippian sites of any consequence at all on the lower Flint River. It was a different culture over there entirely. So the Singamoy site was on the frontier as well. We are standing, by the way, in one of the plazas. On your map you see that we are completely surrounded by mounds. And very typically in a Mississippi culture site, it was a big public area where certain events would take place. Interestingly enough, and another unique feature of the site, there are 2 plazas. This plaza that we're standing in, and a southern plaza that is surrounded on 3 sides by Mound B, Mound F, and Mound A. There's a stream over on the eastern side where a 4th mound surrounding it might have been. And it makes me think that perhaps they had 2 separate plazas for 2 separate reasons. We know on a lot of these Mississippi sites that plazas served 2 purposes. One of them was for religious ceremonies, and the other was for the county market, if you will. It was a market plaza because these people were big into trading, not only bringing in farm products from the little hamlets and farmsteads that were scattered all around here, but bringing in commodities from great distances away and trading them back and forth. The Chattahoochee River seems to have been one of the major trade routes in the southeastern United States in prehistoric times. And all up and down the river we find seashells from the Gulf of Mexico and copper metal from Tennessee and even as far as north as the Canadian border. and they were apparently passing each other, if you will, being traded up and down the river, the copper to Florida and the shell to Michigan and the Lake Superior region. If I had to guess, I would guess this was probably the market plaza where that trading would have taken place, and that the southern one near the big mound would have been the religious plaza. These are all different kinds of questions, but there are ways that we can answer those through archaeology, and that's something we hope to do. We might test this plaza sometime and see if we find remnants or broken fragments or whatever of exotic trade goods, for instance, suggesting that this was the market plaza. On the other hand, if that was a religious plaza, we might find fragments indicating those religious activities. This was a ceremonial center. It was not a capital like Atlanta, really. I use that analogy. It's more a capital like Annapolis is the capital of Maryland. It's not the biggest city necessarily, and not necessarily all of the people that use the site live there. By that I mean, just like the politicians would come into Atlanta or Annapolis, you would have the outlying leadership coming in here for meetings, the citizens coming in for ceremonial and political reasons and things like that. Probably here it didn't have a huge population on site. There would have been the priests and the chiefs and their families, their servants and support staff, the most accomplished artisans, and the wealthiest people in the region would all be living in downtown Singamoy site. But there would have been a huge population, relatively speaking, scattered all up and down Patala Creek and up the side creeks and everything else, in farmsteads and little villages and things like that, that would come in here every Saturday for market day, or every spring for the spring religious rituals, or in the middle of July for the prehistoric Green Corn Festival, and all sorts of things like that. Does anybody have any questions about what we've talked about so far? We'll walk down and go down and see Mound A in just a second.
Still not clear about why here, Frank. Why not closer to the Chattahoochee?
Well, of course, the Rood landing site is over on the river, and it is a classic, typical Mississippian site, just as this is an atypical Mississippian site. And I'm really beginning to think that the trade route frontier idea may have been the main reason for construction here. One of the things that fascinated me one time, it's not just going up and down the river, of course, for trade networks. It's going east and west as well. And one day I had one of my big maps up on the wall, and I started picking it, sticking in pins. And I stuck in a pin up here at Moundville, which is the second largest Mississippi site in all the United States, and moved down this way a little bit and stuck in a pin at about where Montgomery is. There was a big complex of mounds there. Came on straight down that line, stuck in a pin at the Rood landing site. A little bit further down, stuck in another pin, and it's Singamoy. And a little further down, there was a little Mississippi site, period site, over on Pinchafuni Creek, right near the Flint River, all in that straight line. And I think there must have been a major trade route going cross-country as well as up and down the stream. And these mounds, by the way, weren't necessarily a sign of religious activity only. I think political power and economic influence had a lot to do with it. And I really do believe that the reason you've got two such big mound sites here in Stewart County is it's like keeping up with the Joneses. They'd enlarge a mound over there at Rood Mounds, and people over here say, well, now wait a minute, we can't let them do that. We're going to have to, we got to keep up with it. We're going to build one bigger. And you end up with a curious dichotomy here. The Rood Mound site has more mounds on it, but this has got the biggest mound. So each one had a bragging point. activity on top of that mound, other than covering up those ruins after that building burned. And since that's the most important mound on the site, I feel it must come very close to dating the time the place was abandoned.
Where did they get all the dirt to build all these mounds?
There's a big gully that comes down this side, one comes down that side, and then of course you've got the Patala Creek swamp south of us. And in most of those areas, if you get down there, you can see big scooped out areas in the sides of the gullies where they were mining the dirt to put up on top of it. One other thing I might mention about why it might have been abandoned. The other thing is, you know, I mentioned that most Mississippian sites were built down on the river. That meant that they were periodically flooded, which we think of bad these days, but was the real source of refertilization of the soil back in prehistoric times. Up here on Patala Creek, that doesn't happen. And it's possible they just simply farmed out the area and lost their economic base as well, because they didn't have the fertilization technology that we have today, despite the Thanksgiving stories of burying the fish in the corn hills and things like that. So I think it probably was a combination of those things. Both of them, you know, they're basically economic.
Were the rude mounds abandoned about the same time as these?
No, they were abandoned about 100 years later. But see, that was down on the river, where rude mounds are built on the richest soil in the county.
What about Colomoki?
Colomoki is upstream, like the Singamoy site. One of the big differences between Colomoki and here is they didn't have agriculture down there. They were wanderers and gatherers, what was known as the primary forest efficiency. And they weren't so dependent on, you know, refertilization of the soil. Any other questions? Why don't we wander on down toward Mound A while we're still blessed by the absence of rain?
But you can clear it out.
Well, apparently it's very effective now. Thing about the site that I hadn't mentioned to you is very different from any other Mississippi site I've ever seen. Is the whole ground slopes downward from north to south, going down towards Patala Creek. It doesn't look like much, but you remember the mound up there on the north end? It looks like it's only about 6 or 7 feet high. The top of that mound is exactly the same elevation as the top of this mound. The base level drops that much as you come down through here. And I've often wondered if they did that intentionally, or if they did, how they managed to do it with the kind of surveying technology they had in those days. By the way, these are very carefully planned towns. And they did have architects and town planners and all of this sort of thing. You can see it in the symmetry of the way it's laid out. As a matter of fact, one of the things that intrigues me is that a few years ago some archaeologists did some studies about the distance between mounds, and they figured out the Indian scale of measurement. For instance, a standard scale of measurement seems to have been ours 56 feet. And why they picked that figure, I don't know, but most mounds are multiples of that figure apart from another mound in the group and so forth. And also these are very carefully laid out according to north, south, east, and west. They obviously had a good idea of which was the North Star, and and what that implied and so forth. This old site is oriented on a north, south, east, west orientation. If you look at your map, most of the mounds are oriented with the sides going north, south, east, west, with the exception of this one. And in this one, the corner faces north, south, east, and west. So this one is turned exactly 45 degrees off of the pattern of the rest of the mound. So you...
Do you think might that have had some religious significance, the north, the
I think so, yeah. There, we have not been able to do it here, but when you say north, south, east, and west, sometimes they are oriented toward the North Star. Other times, they are oriented toward the direction of sunrise on the first day of spring. The vernal equinox. You see that in a number of sites, and it may be true here in terms of some of the patterns. It takes somebody with an astronomical computer program to figure it out, because you have to remember that the first day of spring sunrise today is not what it was 1,000 years ago. That's the only reason I haven't been able to get to it. I've got to get a hold of one of those programs. The largest mound that we found, largest building that we found on this site is on top of this mound. We found the foundation for it when we were excavating here. It's 4 times larger than a normal Indian house. And I was talking about architecture. They redesigned their basic architecture to compensate for that being an oversized building. Most Mississippi period buildings have 4 roof supports. This one had 8 roof supports. They figured out that by doubling the number of roof supports, they could quadruple the size of the roof, and so on. Some of you may not have heard, we've got an archaeology field school going down here now for this month. There are a lot of teachers who are signed up for it, and since they have to work during the week, we're meeting on weekends. So we're coming down here every Saturday this month, except for this coming Saturday when the Indian Festival is in Columbus, and I wanted to encourage them to go to that. And what we're doing is some excavations over there, if you'd like to go over and take a look at that.
You mentioned this mound and that mound are the same elevation.
Yeah.
Are any of the other mounds similar elevation?
I'm not absolutely sure. I need to double check on that. We did some surveying back in the beginning, but now that we're getting it more cleared out now, it was worse than over there when we started clearing out here a couple of years ago. Now that we're getting more clearing, we can start doing some of those measurements. Matter of fact, I've already done field measurements for the top of Mound B and Mound F, but I haven't done all the calculations yet.
But is this the southernmost?
Well, there's one more mound just south of here, Mound G on the map. It's a little low mound, probably a small platform mound like Mound F right up here, but we don't know much about it either.
But this is the southernmost major mound then, and this is the this one is the northernmost then.
Exactly.
And this one's on the same
on the same elevation,
What are these things shown on the map on the edge?
No, ma'am, this.
Oh, those, I meant to mention that.
That's the big
The reason we have the rope going up right here, notice that the slope is more gradual here than it is over there and so forth. That's because this is a ramp that the Indians built up the side of the mound and either had clay or wooden steps on top of it. So this was the access up the side of the mound, rather than having an extra steep set of steps to have to go up. It gave a more gradual ascent. And there was one facing this way. Again, we talked about the north and south plaza. This is what I consider to be the south plaza out here. This ramp facing out in that direction. The ramp on the southwest side faces down pretty close to Mountain G.
Tillamook is supposed to have the largest mound east of the Mississippi. Isn't this fairly close to it?
Well, Kolomoki is not quite that big. Kolomoki, Mound A at Etowah, and Mound A at the Rude's Landing site are almost exactly the same height, about 52 or 53 feet high. This one on this side is not that high, but because of the slope of the land, it's almost that high on the south side. On the south side, it's close to 50 feet high. And it's very impressive. In the middle of the wintertime, you can see a lot better than you can right now. And it's a very impressive mound to look at, especially from the south side in the wintertime. The Indians were sneaky sometimes too. Let me mention that. Mound D up here on the north side. Well, it was such a big mound, we were really impressed, and we decided to excavate a trench into the side of it to see if we could see how it was constructed. And we discovered what they had done is there was a natural tongue of land there. And they took it and sliced off the front of it and flattened it and sliced off the sides and grooved it in the back and manufactured a mound out of mostly natural soil. They filled in the corners a little bit, I expect, and that was about it. This mound over here, mound C, is about 8 feet high on this side, but it's almost 16 feet high on the other side because they built it right on the edge of a gully. And so people coming in from the west, coming across that gully, would have a 16-foot high mound to go up over instead of one just 8 feet high. So they knew a little, I think, about psychology as well. Make something impressive with the least amount of labor necessary. Let's walk over here to the excavation. Trying to uncover what's here. You notice there's a drop-off over here and over here. There's a thought that this may possibly be another mound that we never knew about before. So we're testing it to see. By the way, there's a big spider web right next to you there. Archaeology, if nothing else, is what you call labor intensive. It's something that cannot be mechanized. And first of all, let me tell you that we've only been working here at the best 1 day a week, except when we've had field schools and things like that. We've done this amount of excavating here in about 3 years. So that shows you how slow it is if you've got a couple of people working 1 day a week part of the year. Incidentally, what my 2 volunteers do, they're very dedicated and they love coming down here. So they come down here every week. In the summertime, when it's too hot to clear and cut, they dig. In the wintertime, when it's too cold to kneel down in the dirt, they clear. In the summer and the fall, we try to do a little, the spring and the fall, we try to do a little of both. I could uncover some of this for you, but there's not a lot to see, and I don't want to get too much of the water in the excavation. But see, they're very carefully working down in layers here, trying to find out what was down here. And one of the important principles in archaeology is it's usually the things that are closer to the surface are more recent than the things that are deep down in the ground. So we dig down in layers. We'll dig a ½ a foot and collect all the artifacts we find there and record that. Then dig another ½ a foot and another ½ a foot, and then we'll compare these different levels. And that's one way that we can establish a time span for the site as well. It's not just all occupied at one time, and we know just from the radiocarbon dates, for instance, that this site was, and excavation evidence that this site was undoubtedly occupied for 400 years anyway, and probably a little longer than that. You have any other questions about over here?
Have you found evidence that this was a mound?
This has been a big puzzle for us, and it's one reason we're still continuing on it. We have found evidence, obviously, that the Indians were living here and building things and so forth. But we can't figure out whether this is a building on a mound or just a building out in the village area. Did you notice the little excavation unit right over there? We're starting to work into the edge of it to see if we can find more direct evidence as to whether it's a mound or not. What we did here started in the middle and working out, and we're not finding out quick enough whether it's quick enough to suit us whether it's a mound or not, so we're going to put a test over there to answer that question.
What kind of things have you found here?
Mostly broken pieces of Indian pottery, some pieces of broken flint. We have found maybe 1 or 2 arrowheads here. A fair number of animal bones, turtle and deer, and occasional turkey bones from the food they were eating. We also find charred plant remains from charred corn kernels and corn cob fragments and charred beans and things like that. So we learned a tremendous amount about everyday life when we're excavating in something like this. We learn more about the ceremonial elite life when we're digging up on top of the mound. But the majority of people that live in here lived in a place like this.
I haven't heard you say that before. You're saying this was a residence?
Yeah. Now, whether it was a residence on top of a mound or not, we're not sure. But we're beginning to find more and more evidence that there was a building here. In the deepest layer, for instance, we think we can see a floor, a baked clay floor. That's one of the reasons we're expanding out, so we can get more of it uncovered to see.
Didn't you find peas or something like that cooked in some sort of a pit on top of the big mound?
Well, over here at the Earth Lodge, we found what I call somebody's burnt stew. When we excavated that, it had a baked clay floor, and there were 2 big round black spots, so we dug those out. And those were pits that had been dug in the floor of the house, of the Earth Lodge, and it had all this charred remain dumped into it. So we had it all analyzed, and it was all corn kernels and bean fragments and pumpkin seeds and a few broken up turkey bones and deer bones, you know. The only thing I can figure is some wife cooked up the guy's stew and he brought it inside and then he burned it on the fire inside and was ashamed to admit it, so he just buried it in the floor. I don't know. This is a fascinating site. The more we look at it, the more interesting and unique it gets. And we're really excited about this field school plan. We've had a increasing pace of these field schools like we're having right now. And so far we've done them sort of on a as best we can basis. And that includes a combination of things. For instance, you notice my old camping trailer around the front there? I guess you'd have to call that the field school porta potty. I hope we'll get some real facilities down here someday.
Frank, could you say just a word about the relationship with Andrew College and Columbus Missouri?
Yeah, I'm sure most all of you have heard about the Iced Tea program and the Iced Tea grant that Stewart County received. And a part of that, of course, was a planning grant to do a formal development of a field school program here at the Singamoy site. And what we're planning on doing is working in close conjunction with Andrew College. It obviously being the closest place, it's only, what, maybe 15 miles, I think, I figured, from here.
Oh, maybe less.
Yeah. And we're really excited about that. We're going to get some outside help. That's always useful to get different perspectives from different people. And also we want to expand on that ecology idea mentioned earlier, the nature walks, the natural resources of the Patola Creek swamps. You know, we were talking about the farming resources here, but there were tremendous natural resources down in the swamps here as well, of wild plant foods that were growing down there, and animals that could be hunted in the swamps that you wouldn't find up in this area. And we want to expand on that as well. So we are going to be working with Andrew College. One of the advantages there is right now our field schools have no real college credit attached to them, although a couple of years ago I had a Columbus College field school down here, but it hadn't been a regular thing. So it'll offer opportunity for college students to get college credit here. Most of the field schools that we've been doing, like this one right now, is predominantly for teachers to expand their horizons and give them better understanding and resources for talking about Indians and archaeology and things like that. But we can even expand on that if we're able to get facilities down here and more interpretive materials and resources and so forth.
If the teacher from the college that's supposed to teach or something, is she part of these classes, learning something about it?
No, I don't think she's a member of the class. She is,
Needs to know about it.
Needs to know about
yeah,
these classes.
she is sort of serving as the academic advisor rather than necessarily is going to be the teacher here.
It's not so bad.
Once you start coming down, you start sliding, right?
I think so. I think going down might be more hazardous than coming up.
Get my rope. It's easier with the rope, isn't it? Oh, Sambo's standing there with a camera. That's not fire.
Still be around.
Yeah, watching it.
Okay, and this side it would be very hard to get up. Yes. Very, very hard. Yes. I love these big old and all these good things. I'm so glad they are planting.
On the other hand, falling trees like this obviously do a lot of damage as well.
This
So,
case is helping, isn't it?
I want to cut this tree.
to some extent, yeah. I was talking to an archaeologist with the National Park Service. The Corps of Engineers is setting up studies of this sort of thing. And my theory at the moment will be to sort of very gradually start clearing this, but very, very gradually open it up a little more and a little more, and let the undergrowth here build up to hold the side of the mound, rather than cutting all the trees at one time or something.
Undergrowth, tell me what you mean by undergrowth. You mean shrubs and grass?
Grass, particularly grass, and a shrub that has a very thick, matty root system. What we're looking mainly for is roots to hold the mound together, but small roots.
Let me just say the obvious. What's so bad about Bermuda grass?
Nothing wrong with
What's
it
so
at
bad
all.
about the last 500 years?
The big problem is like they did at Colomoki. They cut the trees off the mound and then planted Bermuda, and they can't get it to grab hold. There's just so much wash that comes off of it, and it's naturally dry anyway and so forth.
If you could get the Bermuda grass established, that would
Yeah,
serve the same equivalent.
right, exactly. And so that's one of the things we might try is we open it up more, try putting in.
What is this that could take such a good hold?
Pardon?
What is this?
Don't honestly know.
800 years ago,
It could be
would you
moved.
have had any trees up here?
I don't think so, no.
Not when they first built it.
No.
Well,
Probably in the landscape design.
Not unless there was a top or two showing through.
I guess that was I guess the question I would have got to, you know. I guess I want to know, you know, what would the rationale be? That's, you know, is to clear this, you know, clear it down completely, and
Yeah. Well, you know, I hate to see cut trees, to tell the truth.
that's why I asked.
But on the other hand, if you want people to really see the mounds, they've obviously got to be opened up a lot more than this too. We might, at the moment, I'm not inclined to say that we would want to reconstruct buildings on top of it and try to make it look like it did 1,000 years ago. Although we might try that with a mound or something like that. One of the things I am interested in doing, though, is putting up a replica building or two, constructed the way the Indians constructed them here when they were living here, but perhaps up there on the north side of the site.
it is important, I think, maybe to note that this is the only major mound system in the state that's not owned by a government.
Right.
Which means that there is some small latitude in how.
Well, it's not so much latitude; it's a lack of paperwork that's the most appealing.
The road site is controlled by the Corps of Engineers.
Right.
And
Yeah.
they consider it to be a model of passive conservation.
Yeah.
Or preservation.
And they're going to be doing some clearing down there, for instance, but they will not allow clearing of anything larger than 4 inches. So they are going to try to open it up a little bit more too. But that was the rule that they've set over there. And I imagine that'll make a big difference.
But they, in fairness to the Corps, they have done a tremendous job preserving the remaining site.
Oh yeah, they have spent over $1.5 million so far preserving that site, which I think says a lot for them. It really does.
It's not like most of their projects, but they did concentrate on that one, and we were real fortunate. Having obliterated what percentage of the site? 40% of it, maybe? 35 or 40%, I imagine. It was flooded when the dam was constructed. And I would say about 20% of that actually washed away. It wasn't really flooded, but the erosion on the side of the site just ate it away until they put up those pilings and so forth. But they've done a tremendous job there. They really have. And I hope that someday that one can be developed too, because we've got practically a unique opportunity between this site and that site to develop them in contrasting or complementary ways, if you will. For instance, being federally owned, I doubt if it would be practical to have a regular archaeological field school down there. It would just be too complicated to try to do with all the rules and regulations they have. So we could do that here. We could do some of the reenactment kind of thing, planting gardens and all of that sort of business, using native plants and so forth, that might be harder to do over there. Theirs, I would envision perhaps as more of the passive kind of thing, but opened up so you can really see it and see how impressive it is. Just to put all of this in perspective for you, US 27 is down the creek about 1.5 miles or so from here, and the Singer Pond Road is 400 yards from here.
It's a little further than that.
500 yards. Well, you can. In fact, the state has approved a low-grade pavement from, you remember where we hit the dirt off of the road, all the way to where we turned in off the county road. And supposedly the county will pave from there around the loop to the property that the museum owns.
That has always been sort of a standing problem with the site, because in bad weather the place really can get in. Except I'll tell you some earlier
some people in my van. I've got all kinds of radios in there. I tell it almost as a joke, but I literally.
Now what? AP recorder.
You're right.
Is it working? Did you see me put my check in my pocket? Y'all can talk, it's okay. I declare, that's my size. That's right.
Well, hold it up, let us see it, Sam. Oh,
It is
nice.
white with a blue, the green stripe.
Nice. Do you have one like that?
Button down, no ma'am. All mine's got blue on them. Every one.
Well, but that green will not clash with anything. Sure, don't take.
Get Pop Sam.
Did y'all see this in the Albany paper about Lump can make a night curfew to curb gang headlines?
I didn't see
Yeah, I heard it.
In the Albany paper.
Well, Phil, did the tornado come by you?
Did what?
The tornado.
No, it's probably 5 or 6 miles, almost in Worth County. George. But then I tried to get Wally and Lena last night. I meant to call them this morning. It slipped my mind. They have a place up at Fort Gaines, and it hit Fort Gaines too, you know.
How did you get Fort County?
I mean, out from Fort Gaines on the
I couldn't understand why it said in the paper that everybody was taken to hospitals in Eufaula and Dublin.
That was from Fort Gaines.
Fort
I
Gaines.
didn't see, I didn't see
Yeah, but
anything
two
about Fort
different
Gaines.
areas of tornadoes, and Wally and Lena were up there trying to call it home. You know, George, let's turn that off. We're wasting it.
Yeah, turn it off.
Yeah.